Welcome to Relax Story, a peaceful place where gentle stories help you leave behind the worries of the day and drift into a calm, restful sleep. Each soothing narration is designed to relax your mind, ease tension, and bring a sense of comfort and peace. If you enjoy listening, please like and subscribe, and feel free to share your thoughts or story suggestions in the comments. Now, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let Relax Story guide you into a night of deep and peaceful sleep. A cat is asleep on a sofa. Sunlight fills the room. Human footsteps move steadily through the house. The familiar scent of food lingers in the air. Everything suggests safety, comfort, and a life completely removed from the wild. From the outside, it is difficult to imagine that the animal curled up on that soft cushion has anything to do with hunting. It does not need to search for food. It does not face predators. It does not have to survive freezing nights or endure harsh dry seasons. And yet, the moment a faint sound comes from beneath a cabinet, a barely noticeable movement appears behind a curtain, or a shadow slips across the floor, the entire body changes. The ears turn toward the source before the head even moves. The pupils widen, the shoulders lower. The body's center of gravity shifts forward. Each step becomes so soft that it seems to make no sound at all. No one taught the cat that sequence of actions. No training program lies behind that response. Somewhere inside a body surrounded by electric lights, sofas, and canned food, an ancient system still exists, ready to awaken in an instant. What allows an animal living in a modern home to react as though it has suddenly found itself in the middle of a hunt? To answer that question, it helps to look more closely at the body resting before us, not at the habits it learned while living alongside people, but at the traits that existed long before the first houses were ever built. The eyes are among the clearest clues. They are not optimized for the harsh brightness of midday. Instead, they perform exceptionally well during the dim hours of dawn and dusk. Those moments when the world slowly slips between light and darkness. Under such conditions, even the slightest movement can be detected. For countless generations, that ability often determined whether a hunt succeeded or failed within a matter of seconds. The ears tell a similar story. Each ear functions almost like an independent receiver. They can rotate separately, pinpointing sounds with remarkable precision. The faint noises made by mice and other small rodents remain exactly the kind of signals the feline nervous system is built to notice, long before a human becomes aware that anything is there. A cat may already know the precise location of the sound. Its whiskers are not simply decorative features added to complete its appearance. They form a highly sophisticated sensory system. In darkness, when vision becomes less reliable, whiskers help a cat sense the space around it, judge narrow openings, detect obstacles, and locate targets at very close range. They function almost like an extension of its awareness of the world. Even the claws and the way a cat walks reflect the life of an ambush predator. Most of the time, the claws remain hidden within the paws. This mechanism protects them from unnecessary wear while reducing noise during movement. Only when climbing, gripping, or delivering the final strike do those sharp claws emerge. None of these features appeared by accident. They are traces of a lifestyle that existed thousands of years before the modern world. What makes the story even more interesting is that cats and dogs both live beside humans, yet their journeys followed very different paths. Dogs were gradually selected for countless tasks. They guarded settlements, herded livestock, pulled sleds, assisted hunters, and learned to cooperate closely with people. Over time, both their bodies and behaviors changed significantly to meet those new roles. Cats did not follow that path. By the time they began appearing around human communities, they already possessed a skill that was nearly complete hunting small rodents. They did not need to become tools for a wide range of jobs. They only needed to become less fearful of people, tolerate human presence, and adapt to life near settlements. As a result, much of the original predator remained intact. Cats did not abandon their hunting instincts in order to live alongside humans. It was precisely their hunting ability that made humans welcome them. To understand why that happened, we must travel much farther into the past, far beyond cities, villages, and even the earliest civilizations. Across the dry landscapes stretching from North Africa through the Near East and into Western Asia, among low shrubs, rocky outcrops, and sparse grasslands, lived a small wild cat known as Felis libica. This species represents the closest ancestral branch of the modern domestic cat. Around it existed a world filled with mice, rats, and countless other small rodents constantly searching for food in a demanding environment. The journey from Felis libica to Felis catus was not a transformation that completely altered the animal's nature. It was something far more subtle. Cats became one of the most unusual cases in the history of domestication. They learned to see humans as a source of food, shelter, and warmth during cold nights. Yet their bodies continued to operate with the patience of an ambush hunter, the lightning-fast reflexes of a predator, and senses finely tuned for a world of dim light. The history of cats, therefore, is not a story of wildness giving way to obedience. It is the story of a species that learned to stand between two worlds, one paw resting inside the human home, the other still belonging to nature. If the body of a cat still carries so much of that wild world within it, what first brought its ancestors close to people? The answer does not begin with cats. It begins with humanity's earliest granaries. When looking back at the history of cats, it is easy to imagine that humans were the driving force from the very beginning. In many people's minds, the story starts with humans discovering a useful animal, bringing it home, raising it, and gradually domesticating it over generations. That is how many stories about companion animals are told. Yet the earliest signs in the journey of the cat reveal a very different picture. The figure that opened the relationship between cats and humans was not the first farmer sowing seeds in a field. It was not the leader of a tribe expanding a settlement, nor was it the people laying the first stones of a village. It was something much smaller. It was the mouse. The moment the first stores of grain were gathered and placed inside primitive granaries, a quiet, ecological chain reaction began to unfold. Grain became an attractive food source for rodents. Rodents, in turn, attracted the predators that depended on them. Each link followed the next, like ripples spreading across still water. An unexpected question emerges from that sequence. If the first granaries had never existed, would cats ever have entered human history at all? To find the answer, we must return to a time when humans were beginning to transform the way they lived. For most of their earlier history, human groups moved continuously across the landscape. Food was gathered each day through hunting and foraging. Life followed the rhythms of the seasons and the migrations of wild animals. Then, during the early Neolithic period, a profound change began to take place in the Near East, particularly within the region known as the Fertile Crescent, stretching across the Levant and the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. People learned to cultivate wheat and barley. The first fields appeared. The first harvests followed. Seeds were no longer consumed immediately after collection. Some were kept aside for the future. For the first time in human history, large quantities of food were concentrated in one fixed location. Primitive granaries emerged as the beating heart of newly formed farming communities. To humans, they represented security through winter and protection against times of scarcity. To the surrounding natural world, however, they sent a very different signal. To mice and rats, a granary filled with dry grain was something close to a promised land. Food was available year-round. Shelter was reliable. Small rodents quickly gathered around these new settlements. Their numbers grew far beyond what the surrounding wilderness could normally support. An entirely new biological resource had been created, though humans never intended it. But rodents were not the final characters to enter the story. They were merely the signal, a very clear signal to the small predators living along the edges of those settlements. Among the low shrubs, rocky outcrops, and dry landscapes of the ancient Near East lived a wildcat known as Felis libica. These solitary hunters specialized in catching mice, small birds, and reptiles. Their survival depended on their ability to detect prey in a demanding and often unforgiving environment. When farming villages appeared, Felis libica did not need to change its instincts. It did not need to learn a new skill. It did not need to understand what was happening within human society. It noticed only one thing. There was now a place where mice gathered in greater numbers than almost anywhere else. Guided by the hunting instincts it already possessed, the wildcat simply followed its prey. On the other side of this relationship, humans began noticing the new visitors lingering around their villages. What stood out was that these cats did not eat grain. They did not damage food stores. They did not compete with villagers for resources. Instead, they hunted the very creatures that were chewing through harvests and threatening precious supplies. Their presence gradually became tolerated, not because they were kept as pets, not because anyone deliberately chose to make them companions. They were accepted simply because they were useful. This created a highly unusual form of selection. There were no cages, no leashes, no carefully managed breeding programs, only a gradual narrowing of the distance between cats and humans over many generations. The individuals that were less fearful of people could venture closer to the granaries. Those that stayed closer to the granaries gained access to more rodents. More rodents meant a better chance of survival and a greater likelihood of reproducing successfully. Over time, behaviors that fit life near humans became increasingly common within the population. No one sat down and decided to domesticate cats, yet both sides were slowly changing. Viewed as a chain of ecological dominoes, the process becomes remarkably clear. Humans settled down. Grain was stored. Rodents arrived. Wild cats discovered concentrated sources of prey. The cats that feared humans less remained near settlements longer. Humans gradually accepted their presence. Eventually, a new relationship emerged between the two species. That relationship was no longer entirely wild, yet it was not fully domesticated either. Between those two states lay a unique boundary zone. It was within that space that the first proto-domestic cats began to appear. What is particularly fascinating is that the central character in the opening chapters of cat history may not have been human at all. Farmers created granaries. Granaries attracted rodents. Rodents attracted cats. That entire ecological network became the true author of the transformation. Cats did not enter human history because someone invited them. They entered because they discovered a new opportunity for survival. That fact also helps explain a trait that remains visible in modern cats today. This is one of the clearest examples of a loose form of mutualism between humans and animals. Humans benefited from reduced pressure from pests. Cats benefited from concentrated prey populations. Neither side needed complete control over the other for the relationship to endure. Perhaps that is why, after thousands of years living alongside people, cats have retained a stronger sense of independence than many other domesticated animals. In the eyes of a modern cat, there is still a faint reflection of the hunter that once appeared silently beside the first granaries many centuries ago. Yet those early villages were only the beginning. Once cats learned how to live alongside humans, their footprints began to extend far beyond the small fields of the Near East. From there, they would follow granaries, merchant ships, expanding trade routes, and rising empires, gradually making their way across the world. How far can a cat travel if it never truly sets out on a journey of its own? It is a strange question when viewed through the history of this animal. A cat has no wings to cross seas and oceans. It does not undertake migrations that stretch for thousands of kilometers like reindeer, antelope, or many large mammals. It does not gather into vast moving herds. It builds no sprawling territories and founds no empires. And yet, when scientists trace the genetic footprints of modern cats, they find evidence spread across an astonishingly large region, from North Africa to the Near East, from the shores of the Mediterranean to many parts of Europe. The invisible tracks of cats appear thousands of kilometers from their original homeland. What is remarkable is that most of that journey was not made by cats themselves. The first grain stores made it possible. Trade routes made it possible. Merchants made it possible. Ships loaded with grain made it possible. Busy ports made it possible. To understand how a mouse hunter that once lived around farming villages came to appear across much of the ancient world, it helps to see the history of cats as two great waves unfolding one after the other. The first was tied to the spread of agriculture. The second was tied to the rise of major civilizations and the expanding networks of trade that connected them. After the early partnership between cats and humans began to emerge around the first agricultural settlements, cat populations closely associated with Felis silvestris libica became increasingly common around granaries and newly established centers of food production. They were not pets, nor were they domestic animals in the modern sense. They were still predators living at the edge of human communities. During the day, they hid among shrubs, rocky crevices, and dark corners near settlements. When night arrived, they appeared wherever mice were most abundant. They did not follow people out of loyalty. They followed food. Over many generations, something fascinating happened. As agriculture expanded, suitable habitat for cats expanded with it. Seeds were carried into new lands. Granaries appeared in new settlements. Rodents quickly discovered these reliable sources of food. Soon afterward, cats arrived as well. Unlike goats, sheep, or cattle, cats did not necessarily need to be deliberately transported by people for farming purposes. They only needed to remain close to the environments where their prey lived. In this way, the expansion of agriculture unintentionally created an ecological network stretching from one settlement to the next. Ancient genetic evidence suggests that cat populations originating in the Near East played a major role in the earliest phase of domestic cat expansion. This was the first wave, a slow and nearly invisible wave that moved at the same pace as the first farmers. But agriculture carried cats through only part of their journey. Far to the southwest, along the fertile waters of the Nile, something else was taking place. In ancient Egypt, cats continued performing the work they had always done. They hunted rodents in granaries. They protected stores of grain from destructive pests. They helped reduce losses in an economy deeply dependent on agriculture. Yet here, the role of cats began to change. In the Near East, the value of cats was largely practical. In Egypt, however, they gradually occupied a different place. Their images appeared in homes. They were depicted in art. They became associated with ideas of protection, order, and security. Within many religious settings, cats were no longer merely tools for rodent control. A creature valued only for its usefulness is often limited by the function it serves. But when that same creature also carries economic value, cultural significance, and symbolic meaning, the chances of humans bringing it to new lands increase dramatically. It was in Egypt that cats began to become something more than small predators living beside grain stores. Genetic evidence suggests that cat populations associated with Egypt played an especially important role in the later spread of domestic cats. As trade networks expanded throughout the classical world, the influence of these lineages spread farther and farther. Even Egypt, however, was not the end of the story. The force that truly transformed the history of cats emerged where land met sea. Over centuries, the Mediterranean gradually became a vast network of connections. Coastal cities exchanged goods. Empires extended their reach. Merchants moved constantly between ports. Wheat, barley, olive oil, and countless other products traveled in an endless flow. Alongside the grain traveled another familiar passenger: mice. For ancient sailors and merchants, a ship filled with rodents was more than a nuisance. Mice could destroy food supplies needed to sustain an entire crew. They caused significant economic losses. They increased the risks of voyages that might last for weeks or even months. In such circumstances, cats became ideal allies. They did not understand commerce. They knew nothing about economics. They had no awareness of shipping routes or maritime trade. They simply continued doing what their ancestors had done for thousands of years: hunting mice. That simple ability made cats a valuable part of the transportation systems of the ancient world. Every ship carrying cats inadvertently became a floating biological corridor across the sea. A cat left one port and arrived in another. It reproduced there. Its descendants blended into local populations. across many generations, genetic traces spread throughout the Mediterranean basin. Then an even larger network emerged. The Roman Empire connected vast territories through roads, sea routes, military camps, cities, and centers of food storage. Goods and people moved on a scale the region had never seen before. Cats continued following what they had always followed: granaries, merchant ships, crowded military outposts, expanding settlements. Gradually, their presence became a familiar part of urban life throughout the ancient world. Modern genomic studies even suggest that many cat populations in Europe may trace much of their ancestry to North African lineages that spread through Mediterranean trade over the last 2,000 years. The story of cat expansion turned out to be far more complex than once imagined. When people think about a species spreading across vast distances, they often picture armies, conquests, or explorers crossing unknown horizons. Cats chose none of those paths. They conquered no territory, built no empire, imposed no authority over any land. They simply appeared wherever civilization revealed a weakness: a granary filled with grain, a rodent population growing too quickly, a city trying to protect its food reserves, a ship needing to keep its cargo safe. Those weaknesses opened the door. Seen this way, the history of cats is not merely the history of domestication. It is also the history of agriculture, trade, urbanization, and the increasingly complex networks that humans built over thousands of years. Each time people expanded into new lands, another corridor appeared for cats. Every new trade route unintentionally became another path of dispersal. Cats could not read maps. They understood nothing about geography. Yet somehow, they always found their way to the places where civilization needed them most. And still, there remained one land where the story of cats took a far more unusual turn. There, cats were no longer found only beside granaries or within bustling ports. They began to enter a world of symbols, rituals, and gods. What has to happen for a creature that once wandered along the edges of human settlements, slipping silently through the darkness in pursuit of rodents, gnawing at stored grain, to appear on temple walls, in finely crafted bronze statues, within sacred rituals, and even among the spaces reserved for the dead? Up to this point, the history of cats seemed relatively straightforward. They followed food. They followed the rodents drawn to accumulated grain. As trade expanded, they continued to travel alongside people, ships, and the routes that connected distant lands. Everything could be explained through ecology, hunting behavior, and the practical benefits cats provided. But in Egypt, for the first time in recorded history, the place of the cat changed in an unusual way. They were no longer merely tolerated. They were no longer valued only for their usefulness. They were revered. This was no longer simply the story of an animal adapting to an environment shaped by humans. It was the moment when an entire civilization began to see meanings in cats that extended far beyond mouse hunting or guarding grain stores. To understand why this happened, it is necessary to return to where it truly began. Not among towering stone temples, not within solemn ceremonies, but inside the granaries that lined the Nile. For centuries, the Nile Valley served as the heart of one of the most enduring civilizations of the ancient world. From the period of the New Kingdom onward, Especially during the first millennium BCE, cities, temples, and settlements stretched along the river, forming a dense network of people, agriculture, and commerce. The entire system depended upon a familiar cycle. Each year, the river rose and then retreated, leaving behind fertile layers of silt across the fields. Once the waters withdrew, wheat and barley were planted. When harvest season arrived, grain was gathered and stored in large granaries. These storehouses were more than places where food was kept. They represented taxation. They supplied armies. They served as insurance against poor harvests. They formed the foundation upon which the entire society operated. For that reason, any creature threatening those stores of grain became a genuine concern. Mice and other rodents slipped through the smallest openings to consume seeds and damage food reserves. A single animal might seem insignificant, but thousands working together could steadily erode supplies accumulated through months of labor. Around settlements, another danger appeared as well. Venomous snakes were common, especially near water sources and food stores that attracted smaller animals. They posed a different threat to both people and livestock. Within this environment, cats became an almost perfect natural defense. During the day, they rested beneath the shadows of stone columns, wandered quietly through courtyards, or watched the world from elevated perches. When darkness arrived, their hunting instincts awakened. They stalked rodents among sacks of grain, hunted small birds around settlements, and occasionally attacked young snakes. No one needed to train them. No one had to issue commands. Simply by living according to their instincts, cats helped protect the resources upon which entire communities depended. Yet human history has known many useful animals. Cattle provided strength for labor. Donkeys transported goods. Dogs guarded homes and assisted hunters. Most were valued. Very few crossed the boundary into the realm of the sacred. What made cats different? Part of the answer lies within the transformation of Egyptian society itself. In earlier periods, the figure of Bastet was often represented as a lioness. She embodied strength and protection against dangers that came from beyond the boundaries of human life. The image reflected a world in which survival frequently depended upon confronting harsh and unpredictable threats. Over the centuries, society grew more stable, cities expanded. Family life became increasingly central to the structure of everyday existence. As these changes unfolded, the image of Bastet changed as well. The powerful lioness gradually gave way to the image of a cat. Protection was no longer associated solely with battle and visible displays of power. It became linked to quiet care, domestic safety, and the preservation of everyday life. Cats possessed qualities uniquely suited to this role. They protected food stores. They defended living spaces from pests. They cared for their young with remarkable devotion. They lived alongside humans without becoming entirely dependent on them. They were familiar, yet they retained an element of mystery that remained difficult to predict. Together, these qualities made cats the perfect embodiment of a different kind of protection. Not the protection of the battlefield, the protection of the home. From that point onward, something extraordinary began to happen. Cats were no longer found only in courtyards and granaries. They entered the spiritual world. The reason was not merely their graceful appearance or the affection people felt toward them. Cats were revered because they stood at the intersection of several essential human needs. They protected food supplies. They controlled rodents. They reduced the presence of harmful creatures. They contributed to the safety of the household. More importantly, they possessed a rare combination of traits. They were both wild and familiar, independent yet constantly present in daily life, predator and protector at the same time. To the Egyptians, these qualities carried meanings that extended beyond biology. Cats became symbols of unceasing vigilance, of protection against the dangers that always lingered beyond the reach of light. They were not symbols of royal authority. They were not symbols of war. They became symbols of the peace every family hoped to preserve. When a symbol is embraced both in everyday life and within religious belief, its influence begins to extend far beyond the limits of an ordinary animal. In the eastern Nile Delta, the city of Bubastis gradually emerged as the most important center of Bastet worship. Pilgrims traveled there from many regions to take part in major festivals. During special celebrations, the city filled with voices, music, ceremonies, and religious gatherings that continued for days. Within the temples, large numbers of cats were cared for and raised. They became part of religious life itself. Over time, hundreds of thousands of cat mummies were created. Dedicated cat cemeteries appeared. Some cats were buried alongside their owners. Others were offered as sacred gifts. It remains one of the strangest moments in the history of any animal. A creature that once stalked mice around grain stores had become a bridge between the visible world and humanity's invisible beliefs. The most remarkable aspect of this story is not the bronze statues or the mummies preserved across thousands of years. The most remarkable change occurred in perception. Place two images side by side. In a granary, a cat lowers its body toward the ground, ears fixed on a faint sound coming from behind sacks of grain. It waits patiently for the precise moment to strike. In a temple, a bronze statue of a cat stands motionless amid drifting incense, while pilgrims whisper their prayers nearby. The creature in both images is the same. Those eyes still observe the world with absolute focus. Those claws are still built for hunting. Those reflexes remain the reflexes of a small predator. What changed was not the cat. What changed was the way humans saw the cat. Egypt marked the turning point at which cats moved beyond a purely biological role. From then on, they existed not only within ecosystems, but also within culture. They became part of collective memory, religious belief, and the symbolic language through which people explained the world around them. When a creature becomes a symbol, it enters a different kind of evolution, not an evolution driven by genes or changes in the body. It is an evolution that unfolds within the human imagination, within stories passed from one generation to the next, and within images preserved across centuries. But symbols rarely remain still. Ships continued to leave Mediterranean ports. Trade routes continued to stretch toward distant lands. New empires rose and eventually disappeared. And with those movements, cats were preparing to enter an entirely different world. A world where they would no longer be the sacred creatures of the Nile Valley, but newcomers learning to adapt within the growing cities of an ever-expanding world. If Europe had its own wildcat populations long before domestic cats ever appeared, Why is it that most of the cats lounging on apartment windowsills, slipping through old city streets, or living around European squares today are not direct descendants of those native inhabitants? At first glance, it seems like a strange contradiction. By the time the earliest generations of Romans encountered cats hunting rodents in grain stores, Europe's vast forests had already been home to wildcats for thousands of years. They were adapted to temperate climates, dense oak forests, harsh winters, and the unique ecosystems of the continent. Everything would seem to suggest that Europe's domestic cats should have emerged from those local populations. But when scientists began tracing the clues preserved in DNA, a different picture slowly emerged. The path leading to today's urban cats did not begin in misty forests. It began at sea. From roughly the first millennium BCE through the Roman era, the Mediterranean became an increasingly vast network of connections. Ships constantly departed from ports in North Africa, Egypt, Greece, and the Near East, sailing toward the Italian peninsula, Gaul, Hispania, and lands even farther away. Their cargo holds carried wheat from fertile plains, olive oil stored in large clay vessels, wine, handcrafted goods, and countless products feeding a rapidly expanding world of trade. Yet merchandise was not the only thing moving along those routes. Wherever grain was stored, rodents followed. Cargo holds packed with seeds and food supplies became ideal habitats for house mice, ancient rats, and other grain-eating species. For merchants, every rodent represented lost profit. For sailors spending weeks or even months at sea, rodents posed a direct threat to the food stores that determined the survival of the entire crew. In that environment, cats emerged as an almost perfect natural solution. They were not brought aboard for their beauty, nor for symbolism or religious meaning. Their greatest value lay in their hunting ability. A single agile cat could control rodent populations so effectively that it protected enough food to sustain many people throughout a long voyage. That ability carried the descendants of Felis libica far beyond their original homeland and onto the decks of trading ships. But not every cat returned to where it started. When ships reached port, some stayed behind. They appeared around warehouses, marketplaces, and crowded harbors. Others continued along new trade routes, moving farther inland. Small steps like these, repeated over centuries, gradually altered the biological history of an entire continent. The remarkable thing is that Europe was never lacking in cats. Long before domestic cats spread across the continent, Europe's temperate forests were already home to the European wildcat, Felis silvestris silvestris. These animals were larger than most domestic cats today. Their chests were broader, their muscles more powerful, and their heads more heavily built. Their thick tails, marked with distinct dark bands, gave them the appearance of ghosts moving through the deep woods. They wandered among oak forests, mixed woodlands, and dense stretches of vegetation that covered much of the continent. For a very long time, many people believed that Europe's domestic cats were simply domesticated versions of these native wildcats. The confusion was understandable. The two groups look remarkably similar. They can also interbreed and produce hybrid offspring. To the naked eye, distinguishing between them is not always easy, but evolutionary history tells a different story. Genetic evidence shows that most modern domestic cats belong to a lineage descended from Felis libica, the wildcat that once lived across North Africa and the Near East. European wildcats belong to a different evolutionary branch. Though closely related, they were not the primary architects of the domestic cat populations that dominate the world today. If domestic cats did not truly originate from Europe's forests, what allowed them to establish such a lasting presence on the continent? The answer arrived alongside the expansion of one of the largest interconnected systems of the ancient world. Around 2,000 years ago, Roman networks stretched from North Africa to the Middle East, from Italy to Western Europe, from the Balkans to distant northern provinces. Goods moved across these roads on a scale never seen before. Stone roads, rivers, seaports, and logistical hubs connected millions of people within a single economic system. Cats traveled along with that flow. They appeared in military granaries, seaports, frontier towns, supply centers, and densely populated settlements. Every one of these places shared a common feature: stored food and growing rodent populations. Within expanding urban environments, cats became an extraordinarily effective form of biological control. They required no complex training. They did not demand costly maintenance. The mere presence of rodents was enough for their hunting instincts to do the rest. Ancient genetic evidence also suggests that the role of North Africa and Egypt in spreading domestic cats into Europe may have been far greater than previously assumed. The explosive growth of domestic cat populations across the continent appears to have occurred relatively late, closely tied to Mediterranean trade and the transportation networks encouraged by Rome. Yet this expansion did not happen in an empty landscape. When domestic cats arrived in Europe, they entered an environment already occupied by long-established residents. European wildcats still roamed the forests. Martens, foxes, owls, and many other predators were exploiting similar food sources. What is particularly striking is that domestic cats did not succeed through strength. They were not larger than wild cats. They were not stronger than foxes. They did not completely outcompete every rival species. Their success came from a different advantage. They lived closer to humans. Food scraps, grain-filled warehouses, busy harbors, and ever-expanding settlements created an entirely new ecosystem. It was an environment nature had never built on its own. Domestic cats learned to exploit that environment more effectively than many other animals. In some regions, domestic cats also interbred with European wildcats, creating hybrid populations. This process continues to be monitored by conservationists today because it can alter the genetic characteristics of the remaining wildcat populations. As centuries passed and cities grew larger, domestic cat numbers increased alongside them. Their role in controlling rodents became firmly established. From coastal ports to inland marketplaces, the silhouette of a cat gradually became a familiar part of everyday urban life throughout Europe. Looking back across that entire journey, the success of cats does not resemble the victory of a conqueror. They did not need to become the most powerful predator. They did not need the largest body or the greatest strength. What they needed were granaries, warehouses, ports, and cities that never stopped expanding. As humans built a new world through trade, transportation, and urbanization, cats quickly found their place within it. Some species leave their mark through power. Others reshape the world by transforming the environments around them. Cats followed a different path. Their success came from recognizing very early on where the current of history was flowing. Cats did not build cities, but when cities appeared, they knew exactly where they belonged. As cats spread from North Africa into Europe, from trading ships into crowded settlements, another transformation quietly began. Humans gradually became interested in more than their ability to catch rats. Their attention started to linger on coats, on colors, on different patterns, on the stripes running along a cat's body. For the first time in the long history of cats, visible traits began to play an important role in their evolutionary story. And little by little, the history of the cat started to be written upon its own body. If every archaeological record vanished from the world one day, if ancient temples disappeared from human memory, if the ships that once crossed the Mediterranean became nothing more than dust in time, and if all written accounts of cat domestication were lost, could we still learn anything about the past of this animal simply by looking at its coat? At first, that sounds impossible. A coat is only an outer covering. It is not a stone monument. It is not an ancient scroll. It contains no written words for humans to read. Yet on the body of every cat exists a remarkable kind of chronicle. It is not written in language. It is composed of pigments, stripes, patches of color, and patterns that stretch across thousands of years of history. To understand this, it is enough to place a few seemingly unrelated cats side by side. A tabby cat with grey stripes running along its body, a Bengal covered in large rosettes that recall miniature leopards from a tropical forest, a Siamese cat with dark ears, face, legs, and tail standing out against a pale body, a calico carrying white, orange, and black like pieces of a mosaic. Beside it sits a tortoiseshell, its orange and black patches blending together like glowing embers scattered through ash. Viewed with the naked eye, it is easy to assume they belong to entirely different lineages, different colors, different patterns, different visual identities. The contrast between them seems almost too great to believe. Yet when the clock of history is turned back thousands of years, those differences gradually fade away. At the end of every path lies the same point of origin: the wildcat populations of North Africa and the Near East. The quiet rodent hunters that first appeared around the grain stores of early farming communities. What is striking is that their original coats looked very little like many of the dramatic patterns seen in modern cats today. In nature, a coat does not exist to attract attention. Its first purpose is exactly the opposite. It helps an animal disappear. Long before humans began selecting cats for beauty, long before modern breeds existed, the ancestors of domestic cats lived among dry grasslands, sparse shrublands, and semi-arid landscapes stretching across North Africa and the Near East. In those environments, color and pattern were not matters of aesthetics. They were matters of survival. The most common coat pattern among the ancestors of domestic cats was the striped form known today as the mackerel tabby. Narrow stripes running along the body created an exceptionally effective visual structure. As a cat moved through dry grasses broken by sunlight and shadow, those stripes blurred the outline of its body. Among scattered shrubs and patchy shade, they made it more difficult for both prey and larger predators to pinpoint the cat's exact location. At that stage, the coat was more a survival tool than an ornament. Every stripe existed because it offered an advantage. Interestingly, When scientists analyzed DNA from ancient cats spanning different periods of history, they discovered that the striped tabby pattern remained dominant throughout much of the early domestication process. This reveals an important truth. Cats lived alongside humans for thousands of years, while their appearance remained remarkably similar to that of their wild ancestors. For a very long time, humans seemed far more interested in a cat's ability to catch rodents than in how it looked. Then a small change appeared. Not a revolution, not a major historical event, simply a mutation in DNA. One of the key players in this story is a gene called TAQPEP. This gene helps shape the patterns that appear on a cat's coat. It influences whether stripes emerge as thin, elongated lines or develop into more complex structures. When a new variant appeared, the familiar straight stripes began to change. They curled into large swirls. They formed patterns resembling marble or intricate flowing shapes. Today, this pattern is commonly known as the classic tabby or blotched tabby. What makes this particularly fascinating is when it appeared. Genetic evidence suggests that these patterns were not widespread during the earliest stages of domestication. Only centuries later, especially from the medieval period onward, did they become increasingly common within domestic cat populations. It may seem like a small detail, but it carries significant meaning. It suggests that humans were beginning to pay attention to a cat's appearance. The ability to catch rodents still mattered, but beauty was starting to acquire value of its own. The colors of cats tell even stranger stories. Consider a calico. Its coat resembles a map divided into distinct territories. White, orange, and black patches appear beside one another in seemingly random arrangements. Behind this phenomenon lies the activity of genes carried on the X chromosome. Female cats possess 2 X chromosomes. During embryonic development, different groups of cells can activate different versions of color-related genes. The result is the formation of large patches of color separated like islands on a map. When looking at a calico, one is almost witnessing genetics unfolding directly before the eyes. If a calico resembles a geographical map, a tortoiseshell resembles a living flame. Orange and black do not separate into large distinct regions. Instead, they blend together in countless smaller patches. The colors intertwine like glowing coals and dark ash. The underlying genetics still involve the X chromosome, but the absence of large white areas creates an entirely different effect. Then there is a cat even more unusual: the Siamese. In Siamese cats, the coat does not merely reflect genetic information. It responds to body temperature. A particular mutation affects an enzyme involved in pigment production. This enzyme functions more effectively in cooler parts of the body. As a result, the ears, face, legs, and tail become dark, while the warmer central body remains pale. The coat of a Siamese cat is like an ongoing conversation between DNA and the physical environment. By this point, the coat is no longer simply an outer layer. It begins to resemble a living archive. Within every modern cat exist multiple layers of history at once. There is the history of the wild environment, where camouflage stripes once allowed ancestors to approach prey unseen. There is the history of random mutations appearing across countless generations. There is the history of natural selection, preserving traits that proved useful. Finally, there is the history of humans themselves, creatures who began favoring certain colors, certain patterns, and in doing so unintentionally carried those traits farther along the flow of evolution. Every color is a story. Every stripe is a choice preserved within DNA. Evolution does not occur only in bones. It does not exist solely in muscles or behavior. Sometimes evolution appears in the easiest place to observe, right on the surface of the body. A coat can preserve thousands of years of history without a single written word. Fossils preserve what has disappeared. DNA preserves what has been passed from one generation to the next. Time often leaves its marks on the most ordinary things. A stripe running along a cat's side, an asymmetrical patch of color, a pattern that seems completely random. Through these tiny traces, the past remains present without ever speaking. If a coat tells the story of DNA, some cat breeds tell the story of humanity itself. Ancient palaces, dynasties that endured for centuries, manuscripts carefully preserved through generations, living creatures regarded as treasured gifts. Our next journey takes us eastward, where breeds such as the Siamese, Khao Manee, and Korat were preserved through generations as special symbols of ancient royal courts. Some animals survive across thousands of generations because they run faster than their rivals. Others endure because they hunt more effectively, adapt better to harsh climates, or avoid danger more successfully. In the natural world, these are familiar rules of selection, yet the history of cats contains something far more unusual. A pair of blue eyes can be preserved for centuries. A completely white coat can pass from one generation to the next. A silver sheen that catches the light can continue to appear even though it offers no particular advantage in hunting or survival. What makes this remarkable is that these traits were not preserved only in DNA. They were preserved in poems, in ancient illustrations, in shared beliefs, and in memories carried across generations. What allows a breed of cat to move beyond the role of an animal living alongside humans and become part of cultural history? To answer that question, the journey must leave behind the ports of the Mediterranean, follow the old trade routes, and arrive in the land once known as Siam. Between the 14th and 18th centuries, the kingdom of Ayutthaya flourished as one of Southeast Asia's great cultural centers. During that era, many societies recorded wars, kings, and religious matters. In Siam, however, a different kind of manuscript emerged. These were collections of poems accompanied by illustrations that described cats considered fortunate, valuable, or especially significant within the society of the time. What stands out is that the cats in these manuscripts were not remembered for their ability to catch rats. They were not celebrated as skilled hunters. What earned them a place in history were their eye colors, coat patterns, body shapes, and the symbolic meanings attached to them. It marked a quiet but important turning point in the history of cats. For the first time, appearance was no longer simply a product of evolution. Appearance became a cultural treasure worth preserving. Among the cats that stepped from the pages of those manuscripts, none was more prominent than Wichien Mat, the ancestor of the modern Siamese cat. At first glance, they were easy to recognize. Their bodies were slender and graceful. Their pale coats contrasted with darker markings on the face, ears, legs, and tail. Their vivid blue eyes shone like gemstones beneath the tropical light. This distinctive color distribution came from a temperature-sensitive genetic mutation, creating the color point pattern that would later become the signature of the Siamese breed. Yet the Siamese cat earned admiration for more than its appearance. From an early period, it became known for its distinctive personality. These were cats that communicated frequently through vocalizations, actively sought interaction, and seemed determined to be wherever people happened to be. They often gave the impression that they were participating in everything taking place around them. In the cultural memory of Siam, Wichien Mat was regarded as a cat of special value. Its image was commonly associated with palaces, temples, and the aristocracy. Over generations, it became a symbol of elegance and status. By the late 19th century, the first Siamese cats began appearing in Europe and North America. The Western world was quickly captivated by their unusual appearance. What had once been a regional breed soon became one of the most famous cats on Earth. If the Siamese cat is remembered for its blue eyes, the next breed is remembered for something even rarer. Khao Manee carries within its name the image of a white jewel. Its entire body is covered in a pure white coat. The eyes may be blue, gold, or two different colors within the same face. Individuals with odd eyes have always drawn particular attention because of their rarity. Traces of the Khao Manee appear early in Siamese cat-keeping traditions. For centuries, the breed was often associated with royalty. It was regarded as a symbol of good fortune, prosperity, and favorable blessings. Some traditions even suggest that prized bloodlines were carefully maintained within royal circles to preserve their unique characteristics. Unlike the sacred image cats once held in ancient Egypt, Khao Manee represented a different kind of value. These cats were not seen as intermediaries between humans and gods. They became symbols of luck. Their white coats and striking eyes made many people feel they were standing before a living treasure rather than an ordinary animal. If Khao Manee resembles a white jewel, Korat carries the beauty of silver light moving beneath a sky just before rain. The breed originated in the Nakhon Ratchasima region of Thailand. In many local communities, it is also known as Sisawat. Ancient descriptions often portrayed Korat as a cat that brought good fortune. Its most remarkable feature is its unique silver blue coat. Each hair is lighter at the tip than at the base. As light shifts across the body, the entire coat seems covered by a layer of moving silver. This visual effect sets the Korat apart even among countless other short-haired breeds. In Thai culture, Korats have often been given as gifts to newly married couples. They symbolize happiness, prosperity, and abundance. Interestingly, many local traditions hold that a Korat should be given rather than purchased. Its value lies not in its price, but in the meaning of the gift itself. The East is home to many other cat breeds that reflect different paths of development. In Myanmar and across parts of Southeast Asia, the Burmese cat emerged with a sturdier build than the Siamese. Its short coat and powerful muscular structure later made it an important foundation for numerous modern breeding programs. Farther north, China's Dragon Lee presents an entirely different appearance. Its classic tabby coat and resemblance to native cat populations make it feel like a surviving fragment of the past. Looking at a Dragon Lee, it is easy to imagine the cats that once lived around grain stores, villages, and agricultural fields centuries ago. The contrast among Eastern cat breeds creates a fascinating picture. Some were preserved because they were rare, some because they were beautiful, others because they carried the most familiar image of a world that had already passed. At this point, a more important question begins to emerge. What is truly selecting these cats? The answer is not winter, deserts, or predators. The new selective force is humanity. Yet this is no longer selection driven by immediate survival needs. It is selection guided by symbolic meaning. Blue eyes continue to be preserved. Odd eyes continue to be cherished. White coats, silver coats, and distinctive body forms continue to pass through generations. Not because they make cats better hunters, not because they make them faster. They survive simply because people wish to keep seeing them. This is one of the most remarkable moments in the entire evolutionary journey of cats. Not every biological trait survives because of survival itself. Some survive because of beauty. Some survive because of belief. Some survive because of cultural memory. Cats are still evolving, but the environment shaping that evolution has changed. In certain cases, the power of nature has gradually given way to the power of human imagination. If Egypt once brought cats into the realm of the divine, the East brought cats into the realm of cultural symbolism. From that moment forward, an eye color, a coat color, or a particular body shape could become a story passed down through generations. In nature, a trait survives because it helps an organism stay alive. In culture, a trait survives because it helps a memory stay alive. Sometimes what preserves a bloodline the longest is not the strength of the body, but its ability to remain in the human mind. Yet not every remarkable cat breed was shaped by palaces, rituals, or cultural symbolism. In the cold northern lands, another force continued its quiet work on the feline body. It was the wind, the snow, the long winters that stretched across generation after generation. From those frozen forests would emerge cats far larger than their ancestors, the long-haired giants of the feline world. Thousands of years ago, the ancestors of domestic cats walked across the dry landscapes stretching from North Africa to the Near East. It was a world of low, thorny shrubs, sun-scorched grasslands, and semi-arid regions where the greatest challenge often came from the heat of the day. Their bodies were shaped for that environment. Relatively short coats helped release excess warmth. Their moderate size suited a small ambush predator specialized in hunting rodents. Cold nights certainly existed, but they were usually brief and quickly gave way to the warmth of a new morning. Looking at that animal, it would have been difficult to imagine that its descendants would one day appear in the snow-covered forests of the far north. Yet the story of cats did not end in warm lands. Alongside migrating people, expanding trade routes, and newly established settlements, some descendants of those early cats traveled far beyond the places their ancestors had once known. They entered regions where winter lasted for months, places where the ground disappeared beneath deep snow, lands where winds from the North Atlantic or the Siberian plains carried a cold that seemed to linger almost year-round. What happens when a body designed for the desert must adapt to a world that is its complete opposite? The answer is not found in a single change. It appears in the coat, the tail, the paws, and even the size of the body itself. Across northeastern North America, Siberia, and Scandinavia, winter is more than a season. It is a force that shapes life. Snow covers the ground for long stretches of time. Temperatures frequently fall below freezing. Water, wind, and icy moisture continuously draw heat away from every living creature. For a cat whose ancestors evolved as relatively small animals with short coats, this was an enormous biological challenge. In such environments, heat loss is not merely uncomfortable, it is a constant threat to survival. Individuals that retained warmth more effectively gained an advantage. Those with thicker coats were more likely to endure the winter. Across many generations, these pressures began leaving visible marks on the feline body. One of the most striking results emerged in the New England region of the United States. Among the forests, farms, and ports of Maine, a remarkable breed gradually took shape. Its exact origins remain a subject of debate, but most evidence suggests that it developed from cat populations brought to northeastern America by European settlers during the early colonial period. After generations of living in a demanding climate, these cats slowly became the animals now known as the Maine Coon. This is one of the largest domestic cat breeds in the world. Its body is long, its frame is substantial, its muscles are powerful. The long, heavily furred tail is among its most recognizable features. Watching a Maine Coon in winter gives the impression that its entire body was designed to withstand the cold. Its dense coat traps warmth. Longer fur along the belly and underside helps protect the body when it comes into contact with snow or damp surfaces. Large paws function almost like natural snowshoes. Tufts of fur between the toes aid movement across frozen ground. Long before becoming an icon of the cat fancy world, the Maine Coon was a hard-working laborer. These cats lived on farms, in grain stores, around docks, and aboard merchant ships. Their task was simple, but essential: controlling rodent populations. For centuries, their hunting ability was their greatest value. What is especially noteworthy is that the Maine Coon's impressive size did not originally emerge to satisfy human ideas of beauty. At first, it was a biological advantage. A larger body loses heat more slowly. In a cold world, that advantage could mean the difference between life and death. If the Maine Coon represents North America's solution, the vast taiga forests of Russia produced a different one. The taiga is among the harshest ecosystems to which cats have ever adapted. Conifer forests stretch across thousands of kilometers. In many regions, winter occupies most of the year. Prolonged cold becomes the normal state of the environment. Within this world emerged the Siberian, one of Russia's oldest native cat breeds. Records describing these cats date back roughly 1,000 years. Over centuries, they became a familiar presence throughout northern communities. Their bodies clearly reflect the environment that shaped them. Broad chests, large frames, dense musculature. They mature more slowly than many other breeds, yet their most remarkable feature lies in their coat. The Siberian possesses a distinctive triple-layered coat. The layer closest to the skin retains warmth. The middle layer provides insulation. The outer layer repels water and prevents snow from clinging directly to the body. It is one of the most sophisticated natural protective systems found among modern domestic cat breeds. In daily life, Siberians served as effective rodent hunters on farms, in grain stores, and around settlements. In folklore and cultural imagination, they also appeared as trusted companions, symbols of endurance and the ability to thrive in a cold and demanding land. Farther northwest, among the forests of Scandinavia, another figure emerges. The Norwegian forest cat looks as though it has stepped out of an ancient age. Its body is large, its legs are long, its claws are powerful, its tail is thick and heavily furred. Its double coat both repels water and conserves heat against the severe climate of northern Europe. Its climbing ability is especially impressive. Many individuals can navigate tall trees and steep surfaces with remarkable ease. Scandinavian folklore once told of mysterious forest cats capable of appearing in places that seemed almost impossible to reach. Many believe those legends may have been inspired by distant ancestors of the Norwegian forest cat. This breed faced a dangerous period after the Second World War, when extensive crossbreeding caused pure populations to decline dramatically. Only through years of dedicated conservation efforts was the breed successfully restored and preserved into the modern era. 3 cat breeds, 3 different lands, 3 different histories, yet all of them were solving the same biological problem, the problem of retaining heat. Large bodies reduce the rate of heat loss. Thick coats trap layers of warm air close to the skin. Long tails can be wrapped around the face during rest. Large paws distribute weight more effectively on snow. Water-resistant fur helps prevent heat loss when the body encounters rain, snow, or damp conditions. What makes this especially fascinating is that many of these traits were not the result of elaborate breeding programs. They bear the unmistakable imprint of selection occurring within the natural environment itself. Humans may have brought cats to these distant regions, but it was winter that became the quiet sculptor responsible for most of their defining characteristics. Place 2 images side by side. A Felis sylvestris libica, walking through the scorching thorn scrub of North Africa. A Siberian standing amid deep snow in a taiga forest. One wears a short coat suited for a hot, dry climate. The other carries 3 layers of fur against relentless cold. One belongs to the desert, the other belongs to a frozen woodland. The distance between them is not measured in millions of years of evolution. It is the result of generations adapting to different environments. Evolution is often imagined as a series of dramatic transformations. In reality, most of the time it operates through very small adjustments. A little more fur, a little more muscle, a slightly better ability to retain warmth. Each individual change seems almost insignificant. Yet when accumulated across hundreds of generations, they can create an animal that appears to belong to an entirely different world. No environment remains unchanged forever. No species survives for long by refusing to adapt. The strength of life does not lie in permanence. It lies in the ability to adjust to conditions that ancestors never faced. A cat born from warm lands can become a resident of snowy forests simply because life continually reshapes itself to fit the world around it. Then, at a remarkable moment in history, the environment ceased to be the only sculptor. Snow would no longer shape the next transformations, neither would deserts, nor the northern forests. For the first time, human preference began directly influencing the form of cats themselves. Faces grew flatter, eyes grew rounder, and a new question emerged along the journey. Is every form of beauty created by humans truly a gift? Or does it sometimes carry a price that only future generations will come to recognize? For most of the cat's journey through history, its body was shaped by forces that could not be negotiated with. Cold winds swept across dry grasslands, snow-covered vast conifer forests. Long seasons of scarcity tested every living creature. Every change in a cat's body had to pass a relentless examination imposed by nature itself. A coat that retained heat more effectively was preserved. Legs that allowed more efficient movement continued into future generations. A face that improved hunting performance offered a greater chance of survival. Nature was the patient sculptor. Temperature was the decision maker. Hunger, disease, and competition acted as filters that never stopped working across thousands of years. Then a new force appeared. It did not come from the desert. It did not come from snow. It did not come from predators. It did not come from harsh winters. It came from the human gaze. A new question began to emerge in the history of domestic cats. What happens when the trait that allows a cat to reproduce more often is no longer its ability to survive in the wild, but its ability to appeal to humans? What happens when aesthetic preference becomes a stronger selective force than the environment itself? The answer can be seen clearly on the face of one of the most famous cat breeds in the world. Place an African wildcat, the closest living ancestor of the modern domestic cat, beside a Persian cat today, and the first reaction is often surprise. Though both come from closely related evolutionary branches, their faces seem to belong to entirely different worlds. The African wildcat carries a moderately extended muzzle. Its ears stand high to capture distant sounds. Its head is balanced and efficient, optimized for locating prey and processing information from the surrounding environment. Every detail reflects the role of a small hunter living across semi-arid landscapes. The modern Persian, by contrast, presents a completely different appearance. Its nose is so short that it seems almost absorbed into the face. The head is broad and rounded. The eyes are large and prominent. Long, dense fur surrounds the face, creating a softness that can resemble a carefully designed plush toy. How could two animals sharing the same ancestry become so different in only a few recent centuries? To answer that question, it is necessary to return to the moment Persian cats first entered recorded history. Between the 16th and 17th centuries, long-haired cats from ancient Persia, parts of the Middle East, and regions of Anatolia began arriving in Europe through expanding trade networks. They quickly attracted attention because of their luxurious coats, which stood apart from many local cat populations. Yet the early Persians looked very different from the image familiar today. Paintings and photographs preserved from the late 19th century revealed cats with noticeably longer muzzles. Their faces were more balanced. Their skulls retained many features closer to the natural structure of ordinary domestic cats. They were long-haired cats, but they were not yet the famous flat-faced cats of later generations. The turning point arrived in Britain during the 19th century, when cat shows became increasingly popular. In that environment, selection was no longer based on hunting ability or adaptation to climate. Breeders began favoring cats whose appearance stood out most to human observers. A cat with a slightly shorter face was chosen. Another with larger eyes was retained. A cat with a rounder head was bred again. Thicker coats became desirable as well. Tiny changes accumulated generation after generation. The nose gradually retreated deeper into the face. The skull changed shape. The natural lines of the feline head were adjusted little by little. No dramatic event occurred. No instant transformation took place. There were only hundreds of small human decisions repeated over time, across decades and then generations. The modern Persian slowly emerged. What makes this especially remarkable is that no natural pressure demanded such a face. In nature, it is difficult to find a wild cat population where an increasingly shortened nose provides a clear survival advantage. The modern Persian is the product of a different kind of selection. It is the product of cultural selection. Yet the Persian was not the final destination. Once humans realized they could shape a cat's appearance according to their preferences, experimentation continued. In the United States during the 1950s and 1960s, many breeders admired the Persian face, but did not want the demanding maintenance required by its long coat. New breeding programs emerged from that desire. Persians were crossed with American Shorthairs and several other breeds. The result was the exotic Shorthair. This breed retained almost all of the Persian's distinctive features. The round face remained. The short nose remained. The body structure was also very similar. The most obvious difference was the much shorter coat, making grooming significantly easier. For that reason, the exotic Shorthair is often viewed as a more practical Persian for modern life. Not long afterward, another experiment followed. Breeders wanted to combine the luxurious coat of the Persian with the famous color point pattern of the Siamese. This pattern creates a striking contrast between a light-colored body and darker ears, face, legs, and tail. After many generations of selective breeding, the Himalayan emerged. The significance lies not merely in the appearance of a new breed. More important was the method used to create it. Humans were no longer simply preserving traits that already existed. They were actively combining characteristics from different cat lineages to produce an appearance they envisioned. It was a clear sign that human influence over the domestic cat was becoming increasingly powerful. Yet, as appearance became the highest priority, a conflict gradually appeared. Flatter faces became more desirable, shorter noses became more valued, larger eyes appeared cuter. Breed standards continued pushing facial features in the same direction. The biological body, however, does not always agree with those changes. When the nose becomes excessively shortened, the airways can become narrower. Airflow becomes less efficient. Some individuals experience difficulty during intense activity or in hot environments. These issues belong to a group of conditions commonly associated with short-faced animals. Large eyes bring their own consequences. As the eye sockets become shallower, the eyes tend to protrude more. Tears may overflow more easily. The surface of the eye becomes more vulnerable to irritation and environmental injury. The long coat that gives the Persian much of its beauty also requires constant care. Without regular grooming, the fur can mat into dense tangles. Facial folds often require careful cleaning to reduce the risk of skin problems. A paradox begins to emerge. The very traits that make a breed appealing to humans can sometimes be the same traits that demand a biological cost. At this point, the story is no longer only about evolution. It becomes a story about responsibility. For most of feline history, the environment made the final decision. Deserts produced one kind of body. Forests produced another. Snow and cold shaped their own unique adaptations. Today, humans increasingly occupy that role. Humans decide which individuals reproduce. Humans decide which appearances are preserved. Humans decide which traits become the defining standard of an entire breed. It represents a profound shift in the history of the domestic cat. For the first time in this journey, a cat's body no longer primarily reflects the place where it lives. It reflects what humans wish to see. Every modern breed can therefore be viewed as an ongoing negotiation between nature and culture, between biological function and aesthetic preference, between what helps a body operate efficiently and what humans find beautiful. Not every change is harmful. Many modern breeds remain healthy, adaptable, and possess rare traits that have been preserved across generations. Responsible breeding has helped maintain an astonishing diversity within the world of domestic cats. History, however, reveals a pattern that appears again and again. Whenever a trait is pushed toward an extreme, some biological cost often follows. This is not only a story about cats. It is a pattern repeated across many animal species shaped by human breeding. In nature, evolution tends to ask one simple but demanding question: what helps an organism survive longer? In a world increasingly shaped by humans, that question sometimes becomes, what makes an organism more appealing? That moment marks the emergence of a new responsibility. Once a living creature becomes a reflection of human preferences, aesthetics, and desires, the most important limit is no longer what we can do with knowledge and technology. The most important limit becomes what we should do. Even so, flat faces are far from the strangest experiment in the history of domestic cats. There have been moments when the entire journey of a new breed began with something so small that almost nobody noticed. An ear unexpectedly curled backward, a pair of ears folded downward instead of standing upright. A tail became unusually short or disappeared altogether. A random mutation appeared in a single individual. Years later, that same mutation could become the defining signature of an entirely new breed, opening the next chapter in the long story of genetics, selective breeding, and humanity's endless fascination with the world of cats. Throughout millions of years of life's history, nature has continuously produced tiny changes that almost nobody notices. A strand of fur grows slightly longer. A pigment shifts the color of an eye. A leg becomes a little longer or shorter than it was in the previous generation. Such changes appear everywhere, in every population, at every moment. Most exist quietly and then disappear. They leave little trace in the long record of evolution. A kitten is born with a shorter tail than usual. Another carries ears shaped slightly differently from those of its siblings. In the natural world, these are often just small variations among countless others. If a trait does not improve survival or fail to pass into future generations, it is quickly forgotten. Yet sometimes a difference appears at exactly the moment a human happens to notice it. A strange feature suddenly stands out. A tail that is almost gone, ears that fold forward, ear tips that curl backward as though an invisible hand had gently shaped them. From nature's perspective, these are still random variations. From a human perspective, they can become the beginning of an entirely new cat breed. The first story begins on an island surrounded by the sea, where isolation allowed something unusual to survive far longer than it normally would. In large animal populations, rare mutations are often diluted among countless common traits. A new variation appearing in a single individual may disappear after only a few generations. The sheer number of animals makes it difficult for rare traits to persist. Islands, however, often create a different situation. When a small group of animals becomes separated from a larger population for long periods of time, unusual traits have a greater chance of being preserved. Biologists call this the founder effect. A handful of original individuals may accidentally carry uncommon genetic variants. Over time, those variants can become widespread throughout the entire population. What makes this especially interesting is that a trait does not necessarily have to be useful in order to survive. It simply has to appear under the right circumstances. Sometimes, it only needs to remain long enough for humans to notice it. That is exactly what happened with the first of these breeds. In the waters between Britain and Ireland lies an island known as the Isle of Man. For many generations, the cats living there remained relatively isolated from mainland populations. It was here that a remarkable mutation captured human attention. Some cats were born with extremely short tails. Others had only a small stump. Some appeared almost completely tailless. The trait is linked to changes in the development of the lower spine during embryonic growth. Seen from behind, these cats are nearly impossible to mistake for any other breed. Their bodies form a smooth curve from the back down into the hindquarters. The hips are often more prominent. The hind legs tend to be longer than the front legs. When moving quickly, many individuals seem to hop with a motion that resembles a rabbit more than a typical cat. The tail is such a familiar feature that people rarely stop to consider its purpose. For a cat, however, the tail is an important biological tool. It helps maintain balance on narrow surfaces. It assists with posture during precise jumps. It stabilizes the body during sudden turns while hunting or running at speed. When the structure of the tail changes, the effects do not necessarily end there. They can influence the entire lower region of the spine, and that is where the first conflict appears. Some Manx cats can develop neurological and spinal problems associated with these genetic changes. Such disorders may affect mobility and other physiological functions. This condition is commonly known as Manx syndrome. For the first time in this journey, an important lesson emerges. A trait that appears simple on the outside may be connected to far more complex changes within the body. What humans see is often only the visible surface of a much deeper biological structure. Yet the tail is not the strangest feature humans have ever chosen to preserve. A pair of ears in Scotland would spark a debate that lasted for decades. In 1961, in Perthshire, Scotland, a female cat named Chausie drew attention because of a feature rarely seen in domestic cats. Her ears did not stand upright. Instead, they folded forward, giving her a distinctly different appearance. That small change transformed the entire face. It appeared rounder, softer, more expressive. Many people felt as though the cat was constantly listening with quiet attention to the world around it. At first, this seemed to be nothing more than an unusual trait unique to Chausie. But when she had kittens, some of them inherited the same folded ears. That discovery revealed that the trait could be passed down genetically. From that moment, the development of the Scottish fold began. As researchers studied the breed more closely, they realized the story was not only about the ears. The gene responsible for the folded shape also influences cartilage development throughout the body. Cartilage is not limited to the ears. It exists in joints, at the ends of long bones, and within many structures that allow the body to move smoothly. When a mutation affects the cartilage system, its influence can extend far beyond what the eye can see. That realization became the source of controversy. The folded ears helped make the Scottish fold one of the most recognizable cat breeds in the world. Yet the same mutation can also be associated with skeletal deformities, joint stiffness, chronic pain, and reduced mobility in some individuals. For the first time in the story of cat breeds, the central question was no longer how unusual a cat looked. The question became something deeper. How would that appearance affect the life of the animal itself? It marked an important shift in the way humans think about breeding animals. The appeal of an external trait began to be weighed against concepts such as welfare, comfort, and quality of life. Not every unusual mutation, however, carries such serious consequences. Another example appeared on the opposite side of the Atlantic. In 1981 in California, a stray female cat named Shulamith was adopted. What made her remarkable was her ears. They did not fold forward like those of the Scottish fold. They did not stand upright like those of most domestic cats. Instead, the edges curled backward in a graceful arc, as though they had been carefully sculpted. After being adopted, Shulamith produced several kittens. Some inherited the same unusual ears. Once again, the evidence suggested a heritable mutation. From that lineage, the American curl gradually emerged. What makes the American curl particularly interesting is not simply its appearance. More importantly, the mutation responsible for the curled ears is not associated with the severe cartilage disorders seen in Scottish folds. Both breeds possess unusual ears. Both can be recognized instantly. Yet behind those ears lie two entirely different biological stories. One mutation influences multiple structures throughout the body. The other primarily alters the shape of the ear. The outward result may seem equally unusual. The internal consequences can be dramatically different. That realization leads to a larger question. Why are such rare mutations able to survive for so long? In nature, selection usually favors survival, reproduction, and adaptation to the environment. Traits that offer no advantage often struggle to spread through many generations. But when cats entered the human world, a new rule appeared. Difference itself became a form of value. The rarer a trait is, the more noticeable it becomes. The more noticeable it becomes, the more likely it is to be remembered. An unusual individual is preserved instead of forgotten. It is bred. Its descendants inherit the same characteristic. The process repeats generation after generation. Gradually, what was once an exception becomes the defining standard of an entire breed. In nature, success often belongs to traits that are common and stable. In the world of pedigree cats, success sometimes belongs to the rarest traits of all. From this emerges an idea more important than any individual breed. A mutation is neither good nor bad. At its core, a mutation is simply a change in genetic material. Such changes appear constantly in every population of living organisms on Earth. No evolutionary process could exist without them. a mutation may disappear entirely. It may remain neutral for many generations. In rarer cases, it may become the foundation of an entirely new direction. What makes these stories unique is the presence of humans. The moment we deliberately preserve and multiply a mutation, we are no longer merely observing evolution from the outside. We become part of the process itself. At that point, a question emerges that belongs not only to biology. If a trait causes suffering for an animal, should it continue to be maintained simply because people find it attractive? If a difference provides only aesthetic value, is it worth the cost to health and quality of life? Those are questions of responsibility. Looking back at these three breeds, each represents a different lesson. The Manx demonstrates how a mutation can reshape an entire body structure. The Scottish fold reminds us that cuteness and health do not always travel together. The American curl shows that being different does not necessarily mean carrying a biological disadvantage. Together, they mark a new chapter in the history of domestic cats, a chapter in which humans preserve not only what is useful or beautiful, but also what is unusual simply because it is different. Nature creates countless possibilities without any predetermined plan. Every mutation is like a door opening slightly in the darkness, most close again almost immediately. No one notices, no one remembers. But sometimes a hand holds that door open a little longer. From that moment onward, a small accident begins to turn into history. Yet curled ears and shortened tails are still only changes in outward appearance. The journey ahead moves even further. Some cats emerge with soft, curly coats resembling sheep's wool. Others lose nearly all the fur that once covered their ancestors. Some develop bare skin that makes them appear as though they belong to an entirely different branch of evolution. The next breeds will reveal how a mutation can do more than alter appearance. It can reshape the way a body interacts with temperature, with its environment, and with the world itself. Imagine someone who has never seen a cat before in their life. In front of them stand three animals. One is covered in soft curls that resemble sheep's wool. Another is almost completely hairless, revealing lightly wrinkled skin beneath the light. The third is a familiar tabby, carrying the striped pattern that has persisted through countless generations. Without knowing the answer beforehand, it would be difficult to believe that all three belong to the same species. For most of feline evolutionary history, the coat was one of the most stable features a cat could possess. It helped conserve body heat during cold nights. It protected the skin from sunlight, dust, and physical injury. Specialized sensory hairs allowed cats to detect nearby objects, even when darkness surrounded them. Fur was never just a coat. It was part of a survival system. Yet sometimes, a tiny change in the genome is enough to transform that entire covering. From the wild ancestors of Felis libica to modern domestic cats, fur has served as a remarkably versatile biological tool. It reduces heat loss, limits water loss through the skin, provides camouflage during hunting, and creates a protective barrier around the body. During the first thousands of years that cats lived alongside humans, coat colors and patterns slowly changed, but the basic structure of the hair itself remained largely the same. Then, on rare occasions, nature produced mutations that did not affect color or markings at all. Instead, they altered the very structure of the hair. The result was the appearance of unusual curly coats. In other cases, fur nearly disappeared altogether. One of the most famous stories began in the English countryside shortly after the Second World War. On July 21st, 1950, in Bodmin Moor, Cornwall, a male kitten was born among a litter of 5 siblings. He was named Callibunker. From the beginning, something about him seemed different. While the other kittens carried the familiar straight coat seen in ordinary cats, Callibunker possessed a soft, velvety coat of curls. His hairs were finer than normal, forming continuous waves across his body and consisting almost entirely of the soft undercoat. His owner, Nina Ennismore, quickly realized that this was no ordinary accident of nature. Breeding programs were soon established to preserve the unusual trait. Over time, Callibunker became the common ancestor of every modern Cornish Rex alive today. What makes the Cornish Rex remarkable is not simply its curly appearance. The breed lacks almost all of the protective outer hairs found in most other cats. What remains is primarily the soft undercoat lying close to the skin. As a result, the underlying muscles are far more visible beneath the body's surface. Their slender build and graceful movements have led many people to compare them to greyhound dogs, earning the breed a distinctive reputation. Less than a decade later, a similar event unfolded elsewhere in England. In 1960, near an abandoned tin mine in Buckfastleigh, Devon, a curly-coated kitten was discovered. He was named Curly. The woman who found him was Beryl Cox, a local cat enthusiast. At first, many believed Curly was simply another Cornish Rex that had appeared in a different location. The resemblance seemed obvious. Both had slender bodies, distinctive faces, and soft, curly coats. To test this assumption, Curly was bred with Cornish Rex cats. Breeders believed that if both carried the same mutation, the kittens would inherit curly coats as well. The outcome was completely unexpected. Every kitten in the litter had straight fur. The discovery marked a turning point. It proved that Cornish Rex and Devon Rex did not share the same genetic mutation. They were 2 independent stories that had arrived at almost the same outward result. In nature, this phenomenon is known as convergent evolution. 2 different paths, 2 different genetic changes, yet both ultimately produced remarkably similar appearances. It serves as a reminder that nature rarely has only one route to the same destination. A new chapter emerged in Montana, United States, in 1987. Among an otherwise ordinary litter of kittens, a single female displayed an unusually curly coat. She was named Mr. Pesto. Not only was the fur on her body curled, but even her whiskers twisted into spirals. Breeder Jerry Newman adopted her and began investigating the source of the unusual trait. When Mr. Pesto was bred, roughly half of her kittens inherited the same curly coat. This indicated that the mutation was stable and clearly heritable. From that discovery, the Selkirk Rex was born. If the Cornish Rex feels like velvet and the Devon Rex resembles delicate ripples, the Selkirk Rex presents an entirely different appearance. Its coat is thicker, fuller, and gives the impression of a living winter sweater. Large curls cover the entire body, making it one of the most instantly recognizable cat breeds in the world. As unusual as curly fur may seem, all of these cats still retain their coats. Taking one step further leads to cats that have nearly abandoned that covering altogether. In 1966 in Toronto, Canada, a kitten named Prune was born. What astonished everyone was that he was almost completely hairless. Unlike any known breed at the time, most of his skin was fully exposed. At first, the condition was viewed as a rare anomaly. Later, cat breeders realized that the trait could be inherited. Breeding programs were established, eventually giving rise to the modern Sphynx. Interestingly, Sphynx cats are not truly naked despite their appearance. A layer of extremely fine, short hair still covers the skin. To the touch, they often feel more like peach skin or soft suede than completely bare flesh. About 2 decades later, in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, a remarkably similar phenomenon appeared once again. This time, the central figure was a female cat named Varvara. Unlike the Sphynx, Varvara was born with fur. As she matured, however, that coat gradually disappeared. Her kittens displayed the same characteristic. Further study revealed something remarkable. Donskoy and Sphynx looked strikingly alike, yet they were not created by the same genetic mechanism. The two breeds arose from entirely independent mutations. Once again, nature had reached the same result through 2 different roads. When fur disappears, the real story begins. In a cat's body, fur functions as highly effective insulation. It traps much of the heat generated by the body. Without that protective layer, warmth escapes into the environment far more quickly. This is why many hairless cats constantly seek warm places or enjoy curling beneath blankets. The skin then becomes the first line of defense against the outside world. It is exposed directly to sunlight, cold air, and hard surfaces. The risk of scratches and irritation increases as well. Challenges that coated cats rarely face become part of everyday life. The skin's oil glands create another important difference. In furry cats, oils are absorbed and distributed throughout the coat. In Sphynx and Donskoy cats, those oils accumulate directly on the skin surface. As a result, regular skincare becomes far more important. A mutation that alters the coat does far more than change appearance. It affects thermoregulation, influences how the skin interacts with the environment, and reshapes many aspects of the animal's biology. That is perhaps the most important discovery in this chapter. Cornish Rex, Devon Rex, Selkirk Rex, Sphynx, Donskoy, 5 breeds whose appearances seem to belong to 5 different worlds. One appears wrapped in soft velvet, another wears delicate waves. One looks dressed in a thick winter sweater. The remaining 2 have nearly abandoned fur altogether. To the eye, the distance between them seems enormous. Yet, at the genetic level, everything begins with only a few small changes in the instructions that build a body. One gene alters the way hair develops. Another changes the ability to produce hair at all. From there, the entire appearance of the animal becomes something different. The gap between the familiar and the extraordinary is often far smaller than people imagine. The genome is not a rigid blueprint locked into a single form. It is more like a musical score containing countless possibilities. Change only a few notes, and an entirely different melody can emerge. These unusual cat breeds reveal the astonishing flexibility of life itself. At the same time, they remind us that every fascinating trait comes with its own biological consequences that must be balanced and adapted to. Life seems unwilling to stop experimenting with itself. Every mutation appears like a new question posed to the body. Many questions disappear within a few generations. Others survive long enough to become entirely new breeds. Each new form serves as a reminder that diversity is not an exception in nature. Diversity is how nature explores the possibilities available to it. Whether the fur curls into soft rings or nearly disappears altogether, all of these breeds still carry the unmistakable form of the domestic cat. The next chapter leads to a different human ambition, no longer focused on changing fur or body structure. The goal this time is to bring the image of the wild cat back into modern living spaces. Bengal, Savannah, and Chausie will open a new chapter where the boundary between domestic cat and wild cat begins to blur more than ever before. Thousands of years ago, when the first cats began appearing around human grain stores, a long and quiet process was set in motion. Generation after generation, they grew more comfortable with the presence of people. They learned to live in settlements, villages, cities, and eventually inside modern homes. The distance between the wild world and the human world slowly narrowed. Over time, cats became one of the most familiar companion animals on Earth. They slept on sofas, lounged beneath electric lights, and lived among comforts their ancestors could never have imagined. Then something curious happened. After spending thousands of years bringing cats closer to domestic life, some people began searching for ways to bring the wild back. Not by returning cats to the forest, not by turning them into wild animals once again. The goal lay in a different direction. They wanted cats that could still live indoors while carrying the appearance of the untamed world. What makes someone living among concrete buildings want to see, in their living room, an image that recalls a tropical rainforest, an African grassland, or a distant marshland? That question opens a very unusual chapter in the history of cat breeding. While many breeds had been developed to emphasize softness, charm, or unusual features, some breeders of the 20th century pursued an entirely different vision. They were not trying to make cats look gentler. They wanted them to look wilder. Longer bodies began to appear, taller legs, larger ears, coats patterned like those of wild hunting cats. Even movement was selected to evoke the image of predators slipping quietly through tall grass or beneath dense forest canopies. The result was a captivating illusion. A fragment of the natural world seemed to be walking through a modern apartment. The first major character in this story emerged from a bold idea in the United States during the late 20th century. Behind the Bengal stands the image of a small wild cat that ranges across South and Southeast Asia. This species inhabits rainforests, scrublands, grasslands, and riverbanks. Its agile body, exceptional climbing ability, and striking spotted coat make it one of Asia's most beautiful wild felines. Jean Mill saw something special in that animal. She was not interested in creating a wild pet for the home. Her goal was to preserve the captivating appearance of the Asian leopard cat, while maintaining a temperament suitable for life alongside humans. The earliest generations of hybrids were far from simple. Individuals that remained closer to their wild ancestors were often more energetic, less predictable, and more difficult to adapt to domestic environments. Selective breeding continued through multiple generations, aiming to preserve the distinctive spotted coat while stabilizing behavior. Gradually, the modern Bengal emerged. The Bengal is not the largest cat breed, nor is it the strongest. What makes it remarkable is the feeling it creates. Rosette patterns flow across the body, reminding many people of miniature leopards. When light moves across that coat, it becomes difficult not to think of tropical forests where wild ancestors once slipped between layers of leaves and shadow. A Bengal may be sleeping peacefully on a sofa, yet its coat still tells a story about landscapes thousands of kilometers away. If the Bengal carries the markings of the forest, the next breed carries the very silhouette of a hunter from the African grasslands. In 1986, a remarkable hybrid kitten was documented in the United States. It would become the foundation of a new breed known as the Savannah. Behind the Savannah stands the serval, a wild cat that inhabits grasslands and wetlands throughout Africa. Servals are famous for their unusually long legs, large ears, and extraordinary hunting abilities. They can detect the sounds of prey hidden beneath thick grass, then launch themselves straight into the air, leaping far higher than their own body height before striking with astonishing precision. It is a body designed for movement. As those traits entered breeding programs, the Savannah began to take shape. Long legs, a tall frame, a slender neck, large upright ears. Every proportion of the body sets it apart from most traditional domestic cats. If the Bengal evokes a shadow moving through dense jungle, the Savannah resembles an athlete striding across an endless grassland. Yet appearance was not the only thing that carried over. Savannah cats closer to their serval ancestry often possess exceptionally high energy levels. They are curious, adventurous, and require significantly more activity than many other breeds. Their remarkable jumping ability sometimes forces owners to reconsider bookshelves, cabinets, and places that once seemed completely out of reach. A paradox emerges. They live indoors like domestic cats, yet part of their behavior still reflects a wild past that has not entirely faded away. After Bengal and Savannah, the story continues with a breed that is less famous but carries the memory of one of the oldest wild cats associated with human history. That breed is the Chausie. The Chausie traces its origins to the jungle cat, Felis chos. This species ranges from the Middle East through Egypt and into South and Southeast Asia. It is often found near rivers, marshes, and vast stretches of reed-filled wetlands. Unlike the Bengal, known for its dramatic markings, or the Savannah, celebrated for its long-legged appearance, the Chausie is recognized primarily through its body structure. Breeding programs focused on preserving a tall frame, deep chest, powerful movement, and an expression that echoes its wild ancestry. Watching a Chausie move often feels different from watching other cats. Its body seems perpetually prepared for the next journey. Long strides, continuous motion, quiet confidence. Everything about it recalls ancient wetlands, where its ancestors once hunted birds and small animals along the water's edge. The Bengal carries the patterns of the rainforest. The Savannah carries the shape of the African grasslands. The Chausie carries the memory of wetlands stretching from the Middle East to South Asia. When all three stand side by side, a larger paradox begins to emerge. For more than 9,000 years, domestication gradually brought cats closer to family life. They slept beside humans, ate food provided by humans, lived in homes that became increasingly comfortable with every passing century. That seemed to be the destination of the entire journey. Yet once that destination had been reached, some people began searching for traces of the older world. They wanted leopard-like markings on a coat. They wanted ears that recalled wild felines. They wanted the long legs of grassland hunters. They wanted to feel that behind the animal resting on the sofa, a piece of the untamed world still remained, a body that evokes the deep forest while living in an apartment, an image of nature that depends on human care, a predator with a wild appearance sleeping beneath electric lights. At that point, the story is no longer only about cats. It becomes a story about people. From ancient cave paintings to voyages across vast oceans, humans have always been fascinated by the wild world. There is something about distant forests, endless grasslands, and creatures that have never been fully domesticated that continually draws our imagination toward them. That world feels both familiar and distant. It is where our ancestors once lived. It is also a place where most modern humans no longer belong. Bengals, Savannahs, and Chausies reflect that very feeling. They are not simply cat breeds. They are expressions of an ancient desire. The desire to remain close to nature without facing all of nature's unpredictability. Within them exists a remarkable meeting point between wildness and domestication, between instinct and control, between evolutionary memories stretching back millions of years and the realities of modern urban life. There are some things people always want to keep at just the right distance. Not so far away that they disappear from view. Not so close that they lose their mystery. Bengals, Savannahs, and Chausies exist within that space. Perhaps that is why the image of the wilderness continues to appear inside even the most modern homes. Not because people wish to possess nature completely, nor because they want to return to a wild existence. Something deeper is at work. It is the desire to be reminded that the world beyond our walls is far larger than it appears. That somewhere beyond familiar comforts, forests, grasslands, and wetlands still exist the same landscapes that helped shape the history of life itself. Yet pedigree breeds represent only a small part of the vast feline world. Beyond cat shows and registration records, millions of other cats continue living in their own ways, on crowded streets, in windswept harbors, on isolated islands in the middle of the ocean, and in countless places where nobody keeps track of ancestry. There, another evolutionary story is still unfolding, a story that requires no pedigree papers, no breeders, and no breed standards to survive. After passing through the world of high-value cat breeds, pedigrees stretching back through generations, and exhibition halls where every physical detail is judged with meticulous care, an unexpected question begins to emerge. If every breed name vanished, if every certificate disappeared, if all the standards created by humans ceased to exist, who are most of the cats on Earth? Really? The answer is not found in show halls. It does not appear beneath stage lights or on promotional posters. The answer may be curled up on a corrugated rooftop, absorbing the last warmth of the day. It may be watching a fish market from an old seaside wall. It may have just slipped silently through a narrow alley as the city slowly sinks into darkness. The deeper we travel into the history of cats, the clearer one reality becomes. The world's most famous breeds represent only a tiny fraction of the entire picture. most of the feline world exists beyond breed associations, beyond appearance standards, and beyond every title humans have ever created. It is the world of nameless cats. They appear almost everywhere people live, on the rooftops of old neighborhoods, around crowded fish markets, in harbors where ships arrive and depart every day, beside warehouses filled with goods, beneath vehicles left parked for weeks, within the maze-like alleys of cities inhabited by millions. No matter how different the language, culture, or climate may be, the image of a cat living freely alongside humans seems to appear almost everywhere. The greatest difference between these cats and famous breeds is not their coat color or body shape. The difference is that no records exist to document them. No organization registers their names. No rule demands that their ears must fold or stand upright, that their tails must be short or long, or that their coats must curl or remain straight. Their future is determined by forces far older than any registry. Climate shapes them. The ability to find food shapes them. Disease, parasites, competition for mates, and the countless challenges of daily life shape them. None of these pressures care about titles or beauty. They care about only one question: which individuals will survive long enough to pass their genes to the next generation? One often overlooked reality is that most cats in the world do not belong to famous purebred lines. They belong to local populations or common short-haired groups that have existed across generations without any formal registration system. The cats seen in exhibitions usually represent only a very small percentage of the total feline population living on the planet. And within these unnamed populations, natural selection is still at work every single day. Across Southeast Asia, tabby cats carry the familiar striped patterns seen for generations. In the Middle East, populations of sandy-colored cats have adapted to hot, dry environments over long stretches of time. Europe has communities of cats that have lived around farms and villages for centuries. North America hosts urban cat populations that have developed alongside modern cities. Across Africa, numerous local populations continue to display remarkable diversity in both appearance and behavior. What they all share is that they are not official breeds. They are the result of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of years of unrestricted breeding. No one selected their parents. No one planned a new coat color or a new body shape. Each generation is determined by a simple yet unforgiving test: which individuals survive long enough, which avoid disease, which find food during times of scarcity, which reproduce successfully. Those individuals leave behind more genes for the next generation. It is the form of selection that remains closest to nature among domestic cats. From a scientific perspective, it is also one of the most fascinating places to observe evolution in motion. Within such large populations, millions of genomes continuously mix and recombine. New mutations appear. New genetic combinations emerge. Some disappear quickly. Others gradually spread through the population over time. Evolution is not something confined to the distant past. It is unfolding right now in crowded streets and ordinary neighborhoods. Every new litter of kittens becomes part of that process. Yet habitats are not the same everywhere. Each city quietly creates its own unique set of selective pressures. A modern city is not simply a place where humans live. It is also a complex ecosystem. Food sources differ, temperatures differ, population density differs. Competition differs as well. In hotter climates, short-haired cats often have an advantage when it comes to shedding excess heat. In colder regions, thicker coats provide more effective insulation during long winters. Around ports and warehouse districts, skilled rat hunters often enjoy a higher chance of survival because their primary food source is constantly present. No blueprint has been written, no committee decides the standards, no judge stands behind the process. Yet with every generation, cats continue to change. Every neighborhood, every dock, every alley quietly shapes the populations that live within it. If cities are open laboratories, islands resemble laboratories sealed from the outside world. Island cats provide some of the most intriguing examples of how evolution operates under isolation. These populations are often relatively small. Gene flow from outside is limited. Generation after generation lives within the same confined geographic space. In Japan, islands such as Aoshima and Tashirojima are famous for their large cat populations. Across the Mediterranean, especially around Greece, cat communities have existed alongside fishing villages for a very long time. Similar populations can be found on small islands throughout the Caribbean, the Pacific, and the Atlantic. Under such isolated conditions, certain coat colors may become more common than usual. Particular physical traits may spread more rapidly. Rare variations that would struggle to persist in larger populations sometimes gain an opportunity to flourish. When visitors see photographs of cats basking in the sunlight on famous islands, they often notice only the tranquility of the present moment. What remains hidden behind that peaceful image is the quiet story of countless generations of genetic change. Yet when cats arrive on islands, another story begins as well. Inside an apartment, a cat is usually seen as a companion, a pet, a member of the family, a creature that shares living space with humans. It is a familiar image. But from an ecological perspective, a cat remains a predator. The instincts that once helped its ancestors hunt rodents around ancient grain stores never disappeared. Cats still stalk in silence. They still strike when opportunity appears. They still pursue and capture prey with remarkable efficiency. This reality creates a thought-provoking contradiction on islands. Many island bird species evolved in environments with little or no pressure from small mammalian predators. Some nest directly on the ground. Others developed behaviors that are far less cautious than those of their mainland relatives. When cats arrive, the ecological balance changes. Predation rates increase. Some seabird populations decline. Certain endemic reptiles face entirely new pressures. As a result, cats have become one of the most extensively studied subjects in modern conservation ecology. What makes this particularly interesting is that both images are true. Inside an apartment, a cat may be a beloved companion. Within a fragile ecosystem, that same animal may become one of the dominant predators in the food web. These two realities exist side by side without canceling each other out. And it is here that another realization begins to emerge. We have passed through famous names such as Siamese, Persian, Maine Coon, Bengal, and Savannah. These are remarkable exceptions. Names that are remembered, faces that appear in books, media, and exhibitions. But most of feline history was never written by those exceptions. It was written by millions of anonymous individuals. Cats that never won awards, never possessed pedigrees, never appeared in any official record. They were born, found food, reproduced, passed their genes to the next generation, and disappeared from the world without leaving behind a name. Yet those ordinary individuals built most of the modern feline world. From the perspective of evolution, this carries a profound meaning. History tends to remember what is exceptional, the extraordinary individual, the famous breed, the rare story. Evolution works in the opposite direction. It operates through vast populations, through enormous numbers, through countless struggles for survival, repeated across thousands of generations. Street cats therefore hold a special significance. In many ways, they remain closer to the earliest cat populations that once lived around ancient grain stores than many modern show breeds do. Within them still exist the same forces that began thousands of years ago, when cats and humans first learned to live beside one another. We are often drawn toward the most remarkable creatures, the most unusual, the ones whose names are known around the world. Yet life is rarely sustained by exceptions. It is sustained by countless ordinary individuals, quietly continuing from one generation to the next. Sometimes, the animals without pedigrees, without titles, and without anyone to remember them are the ones that carry the future the farthest. But whether they live on isolated islands or within the crowded alleys of modern cities, cats have never been merely biological creatures. For thousands of years, humans have seen far more in them than simple rat hunters. Some cultures honored them as sacred symbols. Others regarded them with caution. Some viewed them as signs of good fortune. Others believed they possessed the ability to cross invisible boundaries that humans could not see. And from this point forward, the journey of cats begins to leave the realm of evolution and step into the world of symbols, belief, and myth. Some animals are loved, others are feared. Across the long history of humanity, those two roles rarely coexist within the same creature. Yet the cat stands as a remarkable exception. For thousands of years, it has been welcomed into warm homes while also appearing in stories that stir unease when darkness falls. On a busy street in Tokyo, a small cat statue endlessly waves its paw, inviting customers into a shop. Thousands of people pass by it each day, seeing it as a symbol of luck and prosperity. Elsewhere in the world, in many European folk traditions, a black cat has often been viewed with suspicion, as though its appearance carries an uncertain omen. Further back in time, along the banks of the Nile, cats were revered so deeply that they became associated with the divine itself. Across Asia, ancient stories told of elderly cats that could stand on two legs, speak human language, and move between the visible world and the realm of spirits. How can the same animal hold so many conflicting meanings? What is it about cats that places them so often at the boundary between reality and imagination? To answer that question, we must step away from the worlds of DNA, evolution, and selective breeding. Ahead lies a different journey. It is a journey through the world of symbols, where humans have observed cats not only through biology, but through fear, hope, and imagination. Cats differ from most of the domestic animals that share human lives. A dog usually expresses its emotions quite clearly. When happy, it wags its tail. When frightened, it backs away. When seeking interaction, it often approaches people directly. Horses tend to respond according to patterns that are relatively easy to observe. Livestock have long been associated with labor or food production. Their roles within human society are generally straightforward. Cats are different. Even after thousands of years beside humanity, they have retained something difficult to explain. They are most active during the transition between day and night, when the world belongs neither fully to sunlight nor entirely to darkness. They move with almost no sound. Their pupils narrow into thin slits during the day and expand into nearly perfect circles at night. Their low light vision far surpasses that of humans. Their eyes reflect light in a way that makes them appear to glow in darkness. Often a cat appears suddenly and disappears just as unexpectedly. For a human mind constantly searching for explanations, these traits create a unique sensation. It is the feeling of standing before a familiar creature without fully understanding it. Whenever something lies beyond ordinary explanation, imagination begins to fill the gap. Across generations, cats became one of the largest screens onto which humans projected their fears, beliefs, and dreams. That journey begins in one of the world's oldest civilizations, along the Nile River of ancient Egypt, beginning in the 2nd millennium BCE and continuing afterward. Cats became increasingly woven into daily life. It was here that Bastet emerged, a goddess commonly depicted as a woman with the head of a cat, or as a cat herself. Bastet was associated with protection, family, motherhood, fertility, and the safety of the household. People sought her protection against disease, misfortune, and harmful forces. Looking closer, these meanings were far from random. Cats genuinely protected grain stores from rodents. They helped preserve vital food supplies. They also hunted smaller dangerous animals, including snakes in certain circumstances. In everyday life, the benefits cats provided were visible and undeniable. When a creature repeatedly contributes to the stability of human life, people begin to see it differently. Practical value gradually becomes symbolic value. Usefulness slowly transforms into reverence. What is fascinating is that Bastet did not make cats sacred. Rather, the role cats played in everyday life inspired humans to create Bastet. The goddess reflected how Egyptians felt about cats more than she reflected the nature of cats themselves. Yet when cats left Egypt and entered medieval Europe, their image changed almost completely. Across many parts of Europe, religious beliefs and folk superstitions existed side by side. Black cats became central figures in countless mysterious stories. This is not difficult to understand when one considers the natural characteristics of cats. Most of their activity takes place at night, while humans sleep. Beneath candlelight or moonlight, their reflective eyes can suddenly flash from the darkness. Their independent nature also creates a certain distance between themselves and people. They do not submit easily. They do not always come when called. They do not always behave in predictable ways. From these very real traits, countless stories began to grow. Black cats gradually became linked to witches, magic, and the unseen world. During centuries of witch hunts, cats often appeared as companions to those accused of possessing supernatural powers. The greatest contradiction lies here. The same animal once honored as a guardian along the Nile became a symbol of fear in many other communities. The cat itself never changed. What changed was the way humans interpreted what they saw. On the opposite side of Eurasia, cats entered an entirely different mythological landscape. In Japanese folklore, especially during the Edo period and earlier eras, stories emerged about the Neko. These were cats that had lived long enough to become something unusual. They could transform themselves, walk on two legs, speak like humans, and interfere in human affairs. Another figure was the Nekomata, often described as an aged cat with a split tail. These creatures were believed to possess supernatural abilities, capable of communicating with spirits and influencing mysterious events. What is striking is that these beings were neither entirely good nor entirely evil. They did not represent absolute virtue or absolute wickedness. Instead, they existed within a difficult-to-define gray area. Perhaps this is one of the most accurate reflections of how humans perceive cats. Cats live very close to people, yet they never entirely belong to the human world. They can be understood to some degree, but never completely. That ambiguity creates fertile ground for imagination. While some stories saw mystery, others saw fortune. Throughout much of East Asia, the image of the Maneki Neko has become instantly recognizable. A seated cat raises one paw as though beckoning someone forward. The figure appears in restaurants, shops, hotels, businesses, and countless storefronts. Many different stories attempt to explain its origin. One of the most popular tells of a cat that beckoned a feudal lord closer, just moments before lightning struck the place where he had been standing. Through that act, the cat became a symbol of luck and rescue. Over time, the Maneki Neko came to represent prosperity, opportunity, good fortune, and the attraction of customers. What makes this fascinating is that it remains the same cat. One culture sees a bad omen, another sees hope. Then there is a legend that has spread across much of the world, the story of multiple lives. In some places, cats are said to have 7 lives. In others, 9. Although the details differ, the core idea remains the same. Cats seem capable of surviving situations that many other creatures could not. This belief did not emerge from nowhere. It began with very real observations. A highly developed vestibular system allows cats to orient themselves quickly while falling. Their flexible bodies and supple spines enable them to twist in midair. Numerous cases of survival after falls that would astonish most people have been documented throughout history. From those observations, a myth was born. The cat's ability to adapt and recover created the impression that it always finds a way back from danger. When all these images are placed side by side, from Bastet along the Nile, to black cats in the European night, to Japan's Bakeneko and Nekomata, to the Maneki Neko waiting at a shop entrance, to the legend of 9 lives, something fascinating begins to emerge. None of these stories truly describe cats with complete accuracy. They describe how humans feel about cats. Within these myths live fears of the unknown, hopes for good fortune, a desire for protection against danger, a longing to control what cannot be fully explained, a curiosity about phenomena that lie beyond ordinary understanding. Cats did not become myths because they resemble humans. Cats became myths because they have always retained a part of themselves that does not belong to humans. Human beings have a tendency to transform what they do not fully understand into symbols. When something exists beyond the explanatory power of an age, imagination fills the empty space. For thousands of years, cats have stood precisely where that space existed. They occupy the boundary between light and darkness, between familiarity and mystery, between reality and legend. Perhaps that is why stories about cats continue to be told generation after generation. Not because cats have changed so much, nor because humans have stopped being curious. These myths endure because every era sees a different reflection of itself within the cat. And perhaps, in the end, humans did not create stories about cats at all. It was the mystery that remained within cats that inspired humans to create stories about themselves. But myths belong to the past. Ahead lies a completely different question. As cities continue to expand, as technology reaches ever deeper into genetics, and as debates surrounding animal welfare grow stronger than ever before, what direction will the future of cats take? Will humans continue shaping cats according to their own desires? Or will cats compel us to rethink our relationship with the animal that has accompanied civilization for thousands of years? If someone living along the Nile thousands of years ago could somehow see a cat lounging in a 40th floor apartment today, they would probably find the sight almost impossible to believe. The animal would still have the familiar eyes of a small predator. It would still groom its coat with movements that have survived through countless generations. Yet everything around it would be different. Its health could be monitored through a smartphone app. Its meals could be carefully calculated according to age, weight, and physical condition. Its genome could be analyzed in remarkable detail. Its medical history could be stored in electronic databases. Would it still be the same cat that once stalked mice among ancient granaries after nearly 10,000 years beside humanity? Another question emerges. Has the evolutionary journey of the cat reached its end, or is evolution still unfolding? Only now the environment is no longer desert, grassland, or fields of grain. The new environment is made of cities, technology, and increasingly complex human decisions. To understand that, we need to look at the world where most modern cats now live. It is a world that barely existed through most of feline history. In many major cities of the 21st century, high-rise apartments have become a cat's new territory. Glass windows have replaced the grasses where their ancestors once hid. Air conditioning maintains a stable temperature regardless of season. Cameras allow owners to watch every movement of their pets from many kilometers away. Automated devices can dispense food on schedule even when no one is home. For an animal that once survived by detecting prey in darkness, this is the most artificial environment it has ever known. The change is even more visible in the way cats eat. The mice that once drew their ancestors toward human settlements now survive only as an evolutionary memory. In their place are thousands of nutritional formulas designed for specific ages, health conditions, and lifestyles. There are diets for growing kittens, diets for senior cats, products created specifically for indoor cats, overweight cats, cats with kidney disease, or breeds carrying particular genetic traits. Medicine has also transformed the cat's place in the biological world. Spaying and neutering make large-scale reproductive control possible. Vaccinations prevent many infectious diseases that once proved fatal. Advanced imaging technologies allow veterinarians to look inside the body without surgery. DNA testing can identify inherited risks long before symptoms appear. Some medical conditions can now be managed for years through long-term monitoring and care. For most of evolutionary history, the environment determined which individuals had the opportunity to survive and reproduce. Today, that role is increasingly shared with humans. We do not simply create living spaces for cats. We directly influence their chances of survival, reproduction, and genetic transmission. As human involvement grows deeper, different groups have begun shaping the future of cats in different ways. What is fascinating is that not all of them pursue the same goal. Cat breed associations focus on preserving the identity of individual breeds. They manage pedigrees, document genetic lines, establish physical standards, and recognize new breeds. To them, every breed represents a chapter of breeding history worth protecting. Working alongside them are geneticists. Their attention lies deep within the cell. The feline genome is being decoded in greater detail than ever before. Disease-related mutations are identified. Levels of genetic diversity across populations are monitored. For the first time in history, humans can observe the genetic architecture of cats on an unprecedented scale. Veterinarians approach the issue from another angle. They see the benefits of selective breeding, but they also witness the health consequences that can emerge when particular traits are pushed too far. They evaluate quality of life, mobility, breathing ability, and long-term health across different feline lines. Meanwhile, rescue organizations and animal welfare groups focus on individual cats that need help right now. They promote adoption, work to reduce abandonment, and encourage more responsible breeding practices. For them, the future of cats is not only about creating new breeds, it is also about ensuring better lives for the cats already here. Further beyond are conservationists. Their concern extends beyond domestic cats. They monitor wild cat populations, seek to preserve biodiversity, and work to prevent the decline of native feline lineages. All of them are talking about the future of cats. Yet that future is not always imagined in the same way. From this emerges one of the largest debates in the modern cat world. Should a cat breed be valued primarily for its appearance, or for its ability to live a healthy life? Over the past century, many breeds have been developed around traits that humans find appealing. Some breeds have been selected for increasingly shortened faces. Others possess exceptionally short legs. Still others have been favored for rare and unusual physical characteristics. These choices have sparked ongoing debate. When a face becomes excessively flat, breathing can be affected. When legs become extremely short, questions arise about joint health and mobility. When extreme traits are prioritized simply because they are unique in the marketplace. Many animal welfare experts begin asking where the ethical limits of breeding should lie. This is where the discussion reaches its central point. In the past, cats adapted to their environment. Today, the environment is increasingly adapted to cats. We can build better living spaces. We can provide more advanced medical care. We can extend life expectancy. Yet this inevitably leads to a difficult question. How much should humans change cats before those changes begin to work against the interests of the animals themselves? The future of cats is not only about purebred lines. It also involves their wild relatives still living beyond human settlements. In several regions of Europe, domestic cats and native wild cats can still interbreed. Over time, domestic cat genes appear more frequently within wild populations. As a result, the boundary between truly wild populations and hybrid populations becomes harder to define than ever before. An intriguing biological conflict emerges. On one side is the effort to preserve nature and maintain original wildcat lineages. On the other is an animal that has traveled alongside humans across the world for thousands of years. Two historical paths that once diverged are now beginning to cross again. As a result, many modern conservation programs must simultaneously manage domestic cats, feral cats, and wildcat populations. This marks the first time in human history that we possess the ability to influence the genetic structure of entire feline populations on such a broad scale. While these debates continue among scientists and conservationists, cities themselves are creating an entirely new form of selective pressure. Millions of cats now live in urban environments. Some are beloved indoor pets. Some survive as community cats fed by local residents. Others persist as feral populations around industrial zones, ports, and suburban edges. To manage these populations, many regions have implemented trap, neuter, and return programs. The goal is to reduce reproduction rates, decrease the number of unowned cats, limit ecological impacts, and reduce conflict between cats and people. What makes this remarkable is that the mechanism of selection is changing as well. In nature, survival determines which individuals pass their genes to the next generation. In modern urban environments, public policy, legal frameworks, and community management increasingly participate in that process. When we step back and look across the entire journey of nearly 10,000 years, something surprising begins to emerge. Cats were once small predators in the Fertile Crescent. They became guardians of grain stores in Egypt. They sailed with merchants across distant seas. They entered temples and belief systems. They appeared in legends, in art, and in the collective memory of civilizations. They became residents of modern megacities. Today, they have become subjects of genetics, data science, and biotechnology. The final discovery rests in a simple truth: evolution has never stopped. What has changed is not the existence of evolution itself. What has changed are the forces continuing to write the story. Once, those forces were harsh climates, mice around granaries, larger predators, and the shifting conditions of the natural world. Today, they are technology, law, ethics, science, and the choices humans make every day. For the first time in history, a companion animal is shaped not only by nature, it is also shaped by debates about its own future. This reveals that the environment is no longer the sole force molding the cat. Culture now participates, technology participates, science participates, law participates, ethical values participate as well. The future of cats increasingly reflects how humanity understands its responsibility toward the natural world. Throughout the long journey from the first grain stores of the Near East to the modern apartments of the 21st century, cats have never fully belonged to the wild. Yet they have never fully belonged to humans either. They have walked beside us through history. They have changed alongside the world we created. Still, the instincts that once drew their ancestors toward ancient granaries remain. In the focused gaze that follows a moving object, in the stalking reflex that appears when a toy slides across the floor, in the quiet vigilance that thousands of years of companionship have never erased. Perhaps the greatest secret of cats does not lie in their hunting ability, their soft fur, or the myths that once surrounded them. Perhaps it lies in something this animal has demonstrated for nearly 10,000 years. The most successful adaptation is not always abandoning your nature to become something else. Sometimes it is the ability to preserve what is most essential while learning how to survive within worlds that never stop changing. Cats have done exactly that for thousands of years. One paw rests inside the human home. The other still stands in the deep darkness of nature.